Okay, here we are back in Snap, and right now if I go to play my game, well, there's no code, so there's not really much to do. Now, instead of starting with our player, we're actually going to work backwards a little bit here. We're going to create some code that helps our player land on the ground. But we're going to sort of invert our logic from last time. Instead of telling the player character that when it touches the ground, it should stop falling, we're going to tell the ground that when the player character touches it, it should stop the player from falling. The reason for this is last time, the player would only stop falling if they landed on a specific object with a specific name. And this platform has a different name than this platform, and a different name than this platform and this platform. They all have different names. So to make this work, using the method we looked at last week, we would need to write a whole lot of code. It would be a giant pain and probably eventually create a lot of lag. So the solution that I'll show you this week is going to be much better for what we're doing here. So let's go to our first platform. By the way, you can double click on one of these and it will highlight it in the scene. So I can see I double click here and it shows me that we're working on this platform under my player character's feet. So this is a pretty simple piece of code, luckily. And after we put it on one of these, we can copy and paste it to the others. But let's start with a control when, and then we need to sense when the player is touching it. So we'll say when touching, and instead of mouse pointer, now remember I already renamed this guy as player, so when this ground is touching the player, it's going to do something. And again, just a little bit different from last week, we're going to actually create a variable. I'm going to call this variable isGrounded and hit OK. So isGrounded is basically going to be like an on-off switch. If it's 0, then we're not on the ground, meaning we can fall. If it's set to 1, then we are on the ground, and we won't be falling. So I'm just going to bring out set, and I am going to set isGrounded. So when the player touches the ground, isGrounded is set to 1. And that's all the code that we need on this platform. Now for it to work on other platforms, we don't even need to rewrite it. We can simply go to Control and Duplicate, and I can just drag this over here and attach it to this sprite as well. So now I've got two sprites that should work as ground, but my player can't move or even fall to test it right now. So now it's time to go work on our player character. First off, let's bring out a simple control block for when clicked. So as soon as we start the game, it's going to basically turn on our player controls. Now I also, even when testing, like to set a starting position. So I'm going to get a go to X and Y. Easiest way to figure this out will just be to turn on my X and Y positions for a second, or you can just click on them to check, and put his starting X right where it is right now at -464, and his Y position at -222. So now even if at the end of my test play my character is up here, when I start the game, he'll start down there in the bottom left. Turning these off just to get them out of the way. And let's also remember that right at the top, we want to initialize our variable. So we are just going to set isGrounded to 0. But it will probably turn to 1 pretty quickly because he is very close to something that is programmed to react as ground. Now it's time to get back into our physics simulation, kind of like last time. We're going to need to loop this so that he'll keep falling when we want him to. So let's bring out that forever block. So we are forever going to check and see if we are on the ground. We're going to do this by just bringing out an if block. So instead of using the sensing block, because our ground is already doing the sensing, instead of using the sensing block, we're going to go to the operators and we're just going to check and see if we're grounded. So we'll bring out an equals operator, and we will use that to compare our variable of isGrounded to the possibility of 1. So if isGrounded is equal to 1, then that means that we're standing on the ground. This is where we need our next variable. We need to be able to control our y velocity, our up and down. So I will make a variable just like last time and call this y velocity, or we could just call it yvel for short, something like that. Just make sure you know what it does. So here's our y velocity, and if we are grounded, we will set this y velocity to 0, meaning we're not falling. We're not moving up, we're not moving down, we're not going anywhere because we're on the ground. So now let's finish off our fall, and in a minute, we'll go back and we'll put a jump in here too. So outside of this if, we'll need to program what will happen if we're not on the ground, which is more or less falling. So we go to our variables and we will set isGrounded to be 0. And when isGrounded is 0, we'll go to our motion and we'll grab a change y by, and we will be changing y by the variable of y velocity. So we're changing y by y velocity, but that won't do much unless we are actually changing y velocity by -1. This will allow us to fall and gain speed as we fall, but not too quickly. So let's test it out. All right, I can pick up my character and drop them, and he lands on the ground. I can also drop him over here, and again he'll land on the ground. Now you'll notice that these other platforms have actually updated already. Because they are duplicates of the original, all of that code has been copied over automatically, which is pretty handy. However, these platforms are not duplicates of the same one, so these aren't responding exactly as we might want. So this is where copying our code over is pretty helpful. I'll simply Control-click and duplicate and attach it to this sprite. There we go, and now I'm falling through the spikes and landing on the ground. Eventually those spikes will do damage to us. Now it looks like this block here didn't get the message. So let's duplicate that and bring it over. And likewise, we'll need to duplicate again. So not all of your duplicates may respond as you expect them to. Go ahead and double check if any of them are acting strangely. So our player character can fall and land on these platforms. This is a pretty important step towards getting our game working properly, but let's give you a little bit more control over your player character now. Now let's get our player character running and jumping. So to set up the walking, this is going to be pretty easy. First, let's go to Control and simply bring out a blank when block. Then we'll go to Sensing and bring out a key, and right now it says space pressed, but we're going to change that space. Let's make this right arrow first and get our character walking to the right. So when the key right arrow is pressed, well, we're going to need to move. So we'll go to Motion, and moving 10 steps would kind of work here, but it wouldn't look great. It'd be very jittery and it wouldn't feel very good at all. We really want to use Change X. So not move 10 steps, but Change X, and let's see how 10 feels. I noticed something that wasn't working very well as I was test playing here. I'm having a hard time getting my character back on screen. And that's because right now their Y velocity, after they fell, keeps climbing. So even when I go to reset the game, that Y velocity is still really high and they're basically falling through the game world because I forgot to initialize or set at the very beginning my Y velocity to be 0. So now let's try resetting my game one more time. And now my character is back. And Change X by +10 feels alright. So I'll leave that. And to get it walking back to the left, all I need to do is Control-click and duplicate, and change right arrow to left arrow, and change X from +10 to -10. Give it a quick test. Walking right, walking left. Looking pretty good. Now, if you want your character to turn around and face the direction that they're walking, which would be a pretty reasonable thing to want, you can just quickly add in another motion and point direction +90, so they face to the right when they walk to the right. And it should follow that if we want them to face to the left, we will simply do a -90. And we'll test that out again. Walking right, walking left. Oh, we forgot one very important click. Click on these two arrows that go left and right here. And now my character can't flip upside down anymore. So I can walk around in my game, but I can't jump yet. So let's get a jump in here, which we've already done most of the work because we already have the physics working. So we just need to find a way to get our character to jump off the ground. I'm going to do this with an if, so I'll go Control and if, and I'm going to put this in our is grounded, because I could put this somewhere else, and I could make it possible for my character to jump at any time, including while they're airborne. But if I did that, instead of feeling like a jump, my spacebar would feel more like a jetpack button. I could just tap it over and over and over, and they would kind of hover around all over the place. But that's not what I'm going for here. If you wanted to build a jetpack, well, we could get into that. But for right now, we only want our character to be able to jump if they're grounded. So if is grounded is true, they won't be falling and they will be able to jump. But while they're falling through the air, they won't be able to just jump while standing on nothing. So while we're grounded, if we sense that the key space is pressed, then what do we need to do? We need to jump up. So we'll just temporarily set our y velocity to be a positive number. How large this positive number is will determine how high the jump is. So I'll set this to like 15 for right now and see how it works. There's my jump. And I am getting a little bit of lag here. But the mechanic is working. And I can jump over here. Now you'll notice a bug where the detection for whether or not I'm on the ground is anytime that the player is touching anything that is programmed to stop it from falling, it will stop falling. So even if my hat touches this, you can see I can kind of jump up through the platform, which doesn't feel great. But otherwise, this is working. This is really everything that you need to do right now just to get your player character working. If you want to hang around for a minute, I'll show you how you can get this to work so that your head doesn't work as a collider that allows you to, well, quote-unquote, stand on this ground. We're sort of using our hat to drag ourselves around, and it feels a little silly. So how could we fix that? Well, we can simply attach something to the player character that will act as a collider just to know if we're grounded and if we can jump. To do this, I'm going to paint a new sprite real quick. I'm going to make this sort of a bright red rectangle that's not too big, something just like this for now. And I'm going to move this so that it is right by my character's feet is kind of how I want you to think about this. So only if my character's feet are touching the ground is the ground going to accept us as being grounded. And that means that the hat will no longer detect it. So how do we actually hook this up? Well, first, let's make sure that this sprite constantly follows our little Mario sprite. So we're going to do this all the time. So right when the green flag is clicked, we will forever be taking this action. And the easiest way to do this is to go to. So we will forever go to the player. Now that's not perfect because it's going to the middle of the player. So how can we fix that and get this good to go down by the feet? So what I can do is simply bring a change y in here. And I can set this change y to be a negative number, like let's try negative 20. And start playing again. Okay, that's down closer to our feet. Let's go with like negative 30. Alright, that looks pretty great right there. Collision might not be perfect, but this is a fine example. And let's change this name. Instead of Sprite 15, I'm going to name this my ground check. And then I'm going to go into my code here, and I'm going to tell it that when it's touching the player, it's not actually going to do anything there. It's going to check for when it's touching ground check. And I'm going to want to go through and change this on all of my code here, which is a little time consuming, but it'll be worth it in the long run. And you can see on some of these, it's auto-updating if these were cloned properly. So now let's go test this out one more time. All right, no longer does my hat allow me to stand on the ground. So this is a worthwhile fix for anybody who wants their game to function a little bit better. You can see I still kind of walk through the bottom of this platform a little bit. There's ways that we could get more picky about this and make it perfect, but this should be good enough to make anyone happy for right now. So the most important thing this week is that you get your character moving around and standing on these platforms. But also check out the next video so that you can make sure that you know how to get your character animated and just looking a little more fun and alive.